Auction manager ignores black woman's bid until she doubles down and buys the entire farm. The auctioneer shouts, "We have $500,000, do I hear 6? A black woman sitting quietly in the back raises her hand. The auction manager locks eyes with her, a smirk on his face, and says loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ma'am, perhaps you misunderstood. This is a real auction, not a community bake sale." He turns away, dismissing her completely. Little did he know that one insult was about to cost him everything he valued. This story will leave you speechless. If you believe that justice and respect must prevail, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story. And comment your city down below along with the word justice so we know you're with us. That day, the Georgia sun beat down on the small town of Oakhaven. The air was thick with the smell of dry earth and the buzz of anxious conversations. It was the auction day for Blackwood Farm, a property that had been in the same family for over a century. For most people here, it was a business opportunity. For Sarah, the woman the manager had just humiliated, it was a matter of honor. At 42, her hands were worn from hard work, and her eyes carried the weight of generations. She wasn't here by chance. Blackwood Farm was more than just land and cattle to her. It was a piece of her stolen history. The central challenge was thrown down the moment the manager, a burly man named Bill Thompson, waved her off. What was at stake wasn't just money, but dignity. Every bid from the other wealthy farmers, all white men who shot her glances of mingled curiosity and pity, felt like a slap in the face. The tension in the makeshift auction hall inside the main barn was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah remained silent, her face an unreadable mask as the numbers climbed, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000. She just watched, her heart beating a steady, controlled rhythm. She knew the real game hadn't even started yet. Sarah's quest for the farm wasn't a whim. It was the final step in a promise she'd made to her grandmother on her deathbed. A promise to reclaim the land her ancestors had worked as slaves. Land that, according to family law, was promised to them after the emancipation but never delivered. In her purse, she carried yellow documents and an old photograph, proof of a claim that everyone in Oakhaven had chosen to forget. This auction was her only chance to rewrite that history. Would the power of money be enough to shatter barriers built over a century of prejudice and injustice? Oakhaven wasn't a big town. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and family lines were worth more than any bank account. Blackwood Farm sat at the heart of the valley, its fertile lands stretching as far as the eye could see. It was the symbol of power in the region. Whoever controlled Blackwood controlled Oakhaven. That's why the auction had drawn the local cattle kings, men like the Miller brothers, known for their business aggression, and Old Man Henderson, whose family had been rivals of the Blackwoods for generations. They saw the land, the barns, the river that cut through it. They didn't see the ghost Sarah saw in every tree and every creaking floorboard. Sarah grew up listening to her grandmother Ilara's stories. Stories about her great-grandfather Joseph, a man with a gift for the land who had made Blackwood Farm prosper under the original Mr. Blackwood. Ilara said that after the abolition of slavery, Mr. Blackwood promised a parcel of that land to Joseph, payment for a lifetime of loyalty. But the promise was lost to time, conveniently forgotten by the heirs. Sarah, now a successful software engineer in Atlanta, had held on to every word. She'd spent years researching, saving money, and preparing for this day. She wasn't a farmer, but she understood strategy, and her strategy was to wait. The main antagonist, Bill Thompson, the auction manager, was a product of Oakhaven. He believed in the local hierarchy, where your last name and skin color still defined your place. To him, Sarah was an outsider, an anomaly. He couldn't comprehend her presence at a high-stakes auction, so his mind defaulted to the ugliest assumption. She was lost, or she was there to cause trouble. His dismissiveness wasn't just personal, it was a reflection of the town's deep-seated, unspoken rules. To add another layer of complexity, Sarah wasn't entirely alone. Her younger cousin, Marcus, had driven down from Atlanta with her. He sat a few rows behind, trying to look inconspicuous. Marcus was a pragmatist. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" he had asked that morning. "This is their world. They play by their own rules." He was supportive, but terrified for her. He saw the condescending stares and felt the hostility in the room. His role was not to fight her battles, but to be her anchor, the one person in that barn who saw her not as a symbol or an intruder, but as family. His presence was a quiet reminder of what she was fighting for, not just for ancestors long gone, but for the future generations of their family. He was her witness, and his doubt only sharpened her resolve. The auction raged on. The bidding climbed past the $1 million mark, a figure that made the air in the barn crackle. The main contenders were the Miller brothers, a duo who operated like sharks, and Old Man Henderson, who bid with a quiet, stubborn determination. Bill Thompson was in his element, his voice booming as he orchestrated the financial battle. Every time his eyes swept the room, he deliberately skipped over Sarah as if she were a ghost. The insult was no longer a single event. It was an ongoing performance. The other bidders noticed. Some smirked, reinforcing the unspoken joke. Others looked uncomfortable, but none dared to intervene. The Miller brothers placed a bid of $1.2 million. The room fell silent. Henderson, after a long pause, shook his head and lowered his hand. It seemed the fight was over. Thompson's smile was triumphant. $1.2 million, going once, he bellowed, looking directly at the Millers. Wait. The voice was calm, clear, and cut through the tension like a knife. It was Sarah. She hadn't stood up or raised her hand. She just spoke, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone turn. Bill Thompson froze, his mallet halfway in the air. For the first time, his composure cracked. He looked at her, his face a mixture of shock and fury. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone dripping with menace. "I said, wait," Sarah repeated, her eyes locked on his. She slowly rose from her seat, her movements deliberate. The barn was dead silent. "Your spotter must have missed my bid." Thompson let out a short, ugly laugh. "Your bid? Ma'am, the current bid is $1.2 million. I think that's a little out of your price range." The crowd murmured. Marcus from his seat leaned forward, his hands clenched into fists. He looked ready to jump up, but he held back, trusting Sarah's plan. Sarah didn't flinch. She took a few steps forward into the aisle, making sure the entire room could see her. "Oh, I heard the number," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not here to bid 1.2. I'm not interested in bidding at all anymore." Thompson's face flushed with anger. "Then what are you doing, wasting our time? Security," he barked, gesturing to two large men near the door. "I'm here to buy the farm," Sarah announced, her voice ringing with power. "The whole thing, outright, as is." She pulled a thick envelope from her purse and held it up. "My name is Sarah Freeman. I'm the great-granddaughter of Joseph Freeman, who was promised a part of this land over a century ago. A promise your employers, the Blackwood estate, never honored." The Miller brothers looked at each other confused. Old Man Henderson's eyes widened in recognition. The name Freeman still echoed in the town's oldest stories. "This is ridiculous," Thompson sputtered. "This is an auction, not a history lesson. Get her out of here." "My offer," Sarah continued, ignoring him and speaking to the estate's lawyer, a nervous man in a suit sitting at the front, "is $2 million. Cash. Right now. You avoid the commission fees to Mr. Thompson. You settle the sale today and you correct a very old wrong." A collective gasp went through the crowd. $2 million. That was nearly double the last bid. The estate lawyer's eyes shot from Sarah to the envelope and then to Thompson, his mind clearly racing through the financial implications. The Miller brothers were stunned into silence. They had been prepared for a bidding war, not a complete shutdown. The conflict had now shifted dramatically. It was no longer about a bidding war between local farmers. It was a direct confrontation between Sarah's historical claim, backed by overwhelming financial power, and the established prejudiced order, represented by Bill Thompson. His authority was crumbling before his very eyes, in front of the very people he sought to impress. The power dynamic in the room had been completely overturned by a single, audacious move. The air in the barn hung thick with disbelief. Sarah's $2 million offer wasn't just a bid. It was a bomb that had detonated the entire social structure of the auction. All eyes were on the estate's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a man who now looked like he was standing on a collapsing stage. His primary duty was to the financially strapped Blackwood estate, and Sarah's offer was a lifeline he couldn't ignore. It was far above market value, and crucially, it was immediate. "Mr. Thompson," Peterson said, his voice shaky but firm, rising to his feet, "your services were to secure the best possible price through auction. An offer has been made that substantially exceeds the highest bid. I am obligated to consider it." Bill Thompson's face went purple with rage. "Consider it? This is a mockery of the rules. The sale must go to the highest bidder. The Millers won. His professional reputation was being dismantled in front of his peers. If a random woman could walk in and bypass the whole system he managed, he would become a laughingstock. "I didn't win anything yet," one of the Miller brothers grumbled, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But she can't just hijack the process." He was angry, but the businessman in him was also intrigued. The situation was unprecedented. Meanwhile, Marcus quickly moved to Sarah's side. The fear on his face was gone, replaced by a look of adrenaline-fueled focus. "The transfer is ready," he murmured to her, holding up his phone. "I just need your final authorization. The bank is on standby. Are you sure, Sarah? This is it." His question wasn't one of doubt anymore, but of confirmation. He had shifted from worried protector to active co-conspirator, ready to execute the technical part of her plan. Sarah gave him a slight nod, never taking her eyes off the lawyer. "The offer is for today only, Mr. Peterson," she stated calmly. "A wire transfer can be completed within the hour. You get your money, the Blackwood estate settles its debts, and this century-old issue is resolved." This temporal pressure was the final push. Peterson knew the estate couldn't afford to refuse. The remaining Blackwood heir living out of state and drowning in debt would fire him in an instant if he let $2 million walk away out of principle. He made a quick, hushed call. The entire barn watched, holding its breath. The only sounds were Peterson's muted murmurs into his phone and the buzzing of flies near the rafters. The crowd's reaction was a quiet storm of whispers. Some of the older farmhands, men who had worked these lands for decades, looked at Sarah with a newfound respect. They remembered the stories of the Freemans. Old man Henderson, however, just watched her with a strange, unreadable expression, his earlier defeat now replaced by a deep, calculating curiosity. He saw something the others didn't. After a minute that felt like an eternity, Peterson hung up. He straightened his tie, his face pale but resolved. The Blackwood estate formally accepts the offer from Ms. Sarah Freeman for the sum of $2 million. A shockwave of silence followed by an uproar of chatter filled the barn. Bill Thompson looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Sarah had won, but as she was led to a small side office to sign the preliminary paperwork, a new complication was already taking shape. This victory felt too easy. The side office was small and smelled of dust and old paper. Mr. Peterson was hastily printing documents, his hands still trembling slightly. Marcus stood guard by the door, a silent and imposing figure ensuring they had privacy. Sarah felt a wave of profound emotion wash over her. Her grandmother's face flashed in her mind. The stories, the promise. She had done it. She had reclaimed their history. The pen felt heavy in her hand as Peterson laid the initial sales agreement on the desk. "Once you sign this, and the funds are verified, the property is provisionally yours pending the final closing in 30 days, Peterson explained, avoiding her gaze. But just as she was about to sign, there was a firm knock on the door. Before Marcus could intervene, the door opened, and old man Henderson stepped inside, his hat in his hands. He didn't look hostile. He looked grave. "Peterson, I need a word with Ms. Freeman," Henderson said, his voice low. "Alone." Peterson looked flustered but nodded, quickly excusing himself. Marcus looked at Sarah, who gave him a signal to stay. "Whatever you have to say, Mr. Henderson, you can say in front of my cousin," she said. Henderson sighed, his old eyes fixed on her. "You're a Freeman," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I knew your great-grandfather. Joseph was a better farmer than old man Blackwood ever was. He deserved a piece of this land." Sarah was taken aback. "Thank you. I'm not here to congratulate you," he went on, his tone shifting. "I'm here to warn you. You're smart, but you're not from here. You don't know what you've just bought." A cold knot of dread formed in Sarah's stomach. "What are you talking about?" "You have to ask yourself why the Blackwood estate was so desperate to sell," Henderson continued, leaning closer. "Why they'd let Peterson jump at a cash offer and bypass a bidding war that could have gone higher. It's not just about the debt, girl, it's about the water." "The water?" Marcus echoed, stepping forward. "The creek that feeds this whole valley," Henderson explained. "The state has been doing soil and water tests upriver for months. There's a chemical company about 20 miles north. Word is there's been a leak, a bad one. Nothing's been made public yet, but the contamination is slowly moving downstream. The Blackwoods know this land is about to become worthless. They're cashing out before the news breaks, and they're left with a toxic swamp. The world seemed to tilt under Sarah's feet. The triumphant joy she felt moments ago curdled into horror. She hadn't just bought a farm, she'd bought a $2 million toxic waste site. Her historic victory was a trap. The promise she fulfilled for her grandmother would end in her own financial ruin. "You're a fool if you sign that paper," Henderson said, his gaze hard. "I was bidding on it because I have the means to fight the chemical company in court for a decade. You don't. They'll bankrupt you." He gave her a final, pitying look. "The Blackwoods are getting their final revenge on your family. Don't let them." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving an echoing silence in his wake. Sarah stared at the contract on the desk. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Bill Thompson's smug face flashed in her mind, and she could already imagine his victorious laughter. She had silenced him with money, but now it seemed the old guard of Oakhaven was about to have the last laugh after all. Her victory had turned to ash in her mouth. The silence in the office was deafening. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice a frantic whisper. "Sarah, don't sign it. He's right. This is a trap. We can walk away right now. To hell with the public humiliation. $2 million. Sarah, that's everything." For a moment, Sarah's resolve crumbled. The weight of Henderson's warning was crushing. She imagined her life savings, years of hard work and disciplined saving, vanishing into a piece of poisoned land. The faces of her ancestors, once a source of strength, now seemed to look at her with sorrow. She had failed them. She looked out the small office window and saw Bill Thompson talking animatedly with the Miller brothers. They were all looking in her direction, and Thompson was laughing. It was a cruel, triumphant laugh. He must have heard the rumors too. He wasn't just watching her get humiliated. He was savoring it. The entire auction was a setup, and she was the punchline. Mr. Peterson re-entered the office, his face a mask of feigned impatience. "Is everything all right? We need to finalize the preliminary agreement." Sarah looked at him, her eyes narrowed. "Did you know about a potential contamination issue, Mr. Peterson?" The lawyer flinched but recovered quickly. "I have no knowledge of any such thing," he said stiffly, a little too quickly. "That is pure speculation and local gossip. The property is being sold as is." The legal phrase hung in the air, a shield for his deceit. The consequences of her next move were crystal clear. If she backed out now, she would be branded a fool. Her grand gesture would be remembered as an arrogant failure. Thompson and the rest of Oakhaven's old guard would win. The story would be told for years, the outsider from the city who got played. But if she signed, she faced financial ruin, a long and fruitless legal battle, and the bitter reality of owning a toxic legacy. "Sarah, let's go," Marcus urged, grabbing her arm gently. "It's not worth it." But as she looked at the contract, a different feeling began to surface through the fear and humiliation. Anger. A cold, sharp anger. She had been manipulated. They had used her family's history, her sense of justice as bait. They hadn't just insulted her, they had tried to destroy her. The fight was no longer just about reclaiming the past. It was about refusing to be a victim in the present. Her entire demeanor shifted. The vulnerability in her eyes was replaced by a hard, analytical glint. She wasn't just the descendant of a farmer anymore. She was a top-tier software engineer who solved complex problems for a living. This was just another problem. A system with hidden variables and bad actors, and she was going to debug it. "Marcus," she said, her voice eerily calm, "get my laptop from the car and get me a coffee, a large one." Marcus stared at her, confused by her sudden change. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not backing down," she said, looking straight at the smirking Bill Thompson through the window. "I'm going to find the truth. They've given me 30 days until closing. I'm going to use every single second." For the next 3 weeks, Sarah did not set foot on Blackwood Farm. Instead, she turned her rented motel room in Oakhaven into a high-tech command center. While Marcus handled logistics, running errands, and acting as her liaison, Sarah waged a digital war. Her laptop was her weapon, the internet her battlefield. She wasn't a farmer and she wasn't a lawyer, but she was an expert researcher with a mind built for data and patterns. The old guard of Oakhaven operated on whispers and handshakes. She operated on gigabytes and encrypted files. Her first step was to ignore the gossip and focus on facts. She accessed state environmental protection databases, pulling every public record on the upriver chemical company, Northwood Solvents. She cross-referenced EPA reports, local water quality data, and geological surveys. For days, she found nothing concrete, just hints and red flags that seemed to support Henderson's story. The dread was a constant weight, but she pushed through it, fueled by coffee and a burning need for certainty. Her growth was palpable. The emotional drive to reclaim her family's honor was still there, but it was now tempered and guided by cold, hard logic. This challenge forced her to evolve beyond the initial righteous anger. She had to be smarter, faster, and more meticulous than her opponents. She wasn't just fighting prejudice anymore, she was fighting a sophisticated deception. The breakthrough came late one night, deep within a mountain of municipal planning documents. She found an application from a green energy corporation, Solara Innovations, filed 6 months ago. They were planning a massive solar farm project in the county. As she read further, her heart began to race. The project required significant land for its infrastructure, and their preferred location was adjacent to Northwood Solvents and Blackwood Farm. Then she found the key. Solara's own environmental impact report noted the potential for low-level contamination from Northwood solvents, but it wasn't a deal-breaker. In fact, Solara's proposal included a fully funded multi-million-dollar soil and water remediation program as part of their development deal, a program legally required before they could build. Furthermore, they had filed an official letter of intent to purchase access and utility easements from the future owner of Blackwood Farm for a sum that was staggering. Henderson wasn't lying, but he only had half the story. The old farmer saw a problem, contamination, and stopped there. He didn't have the vision or the tools to see the multi-million-dollar solution that was already in motion. The Blackwood estate, likely getting lowball offers from Solara, had decided to cash out in a panic, hoping some local farmer would buy the problem before the full picture emerged. Sarah finally understood. Her outsider status, the very thing Thompson had mocked and Henderson had pitied, was her greatest asset. She saw the modern world encroaching on Oakhaven, while the locals were still fighting old battles. She wasn't buying a toxic swamp, she was buying a golden ticket. On the day of the final closing, she walked into the lawyer's office with a newfound confidence. Thompson was there, along with Henderson, both looking like vultures waiting for a carcass. "Heard you were ready to sign your future away," Thompson sneered. Sarah simply smiled. She signed the papers with a flourish and pushed them across the desk. "The sale is complete." Then she turned to Henderson. "Thank you for your warning, Mr. Henderson. It was very helpful." She pulled a document from her briefcase. "This is the letter of intent from Solara Innovations. They seem very eager to meet the new owner of Blackwood Farm. It turns out my $2 million problem is actually a $5 million opportunity." The color drained from Thompson's and Henderson's faces. The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah's transformation was complete. She had not only reclaimed her family's land, but had done so by outsmarting the very system designed to keep her out, proving that true power wasn't just in land or money, but in the vision to see what others can't. News of Sarah's triumph spread through Oakhaven like a flash flood. The story changed with each telling, but the core truth remained. The quiet woman from Atlanta had not only bought Blackwood Farm, she had outmaneuvered every power player in the valley. At the local diner, the talk was no longer of her foolishness, but of her genius. She was no longer an outsider. She was a legend in the making. Old Man Henderson's arc concluded not with a bang, but with a quiet, symbolic gesture. A week after the closing, a package was delivered to Sarah's motel room. Inside was a small handcrafted leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes on the soil types and seasonal water levels of Blackwood Farm, dating back 50 years. There was no return address, but Sarah knew it was from him. It was his way of acknowledging defeat and perhaps showing respect for a fellow strategist. He was passing the torch, admitting that the future of Oakhaven's land was now in her hands. Marcus, fully embracing his new role, became the official point of contact for Solara Innovations. He handled the initial conference calls with their engineers and lawyers, his voice steady and professional. He and Sarah formed a perfect team. She was the visionary and strategist. He was the grounded and capable executor. Their bond, forged in the fire of the auction, was now unbreakable. They were the new face of the Freeman legacy. But one person was not ready to accept the new reality. Bill Thompson was a ghost in his own town. Stripped of his commission from the biggest sale of his career and publicly humiliated, he was consumed by a toxic brew of rage and shame. He saw Sarah's victory as a personal attack, a deliberate effort to ruin him. In his mind, she hadn't just bought a farm. She had stolen his standing, his pride, his very identity in the town he'd fought so hard to conquer. The tension in Oakhaven shifted. It was no longer about a financial or legal battle. It was about what a desperate man does when he has nothing left to lose. Thompson was seen drinking heavily at the local bar, his whispers turning into loud, rambling threats against the city woman who thinks she can buy our history. People started to avoid him. They knew his anger was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah was warned to be careful. The local sheriff paid her a visit, advising her to stay away from the farm until Thompson cooled off. But Sarah knew she couldn't hide. To do so would be to give him power over her. The final confrontation was inevitable. She had claimed the land. Now she had to stand her ground on it. The climax was no longer a question of if, but when. And it would not happen in an office or a courtroom. It would happen on the soil her great-grandfather had once tilled. Sarah decided the wait was over. She drove her car down the long gravel driveway of Blackwood Farm, the tires crunching reassuringly on her land. With Marcus by her side, she stepped out and breathed in the air. It felt different now. It felt like home. They were walking towards the main house when a dusty pickup truck came roaring up the drive, skidding to a halt and blocking their path. Bill Thompson climbed out, his face blotchy and his eyes wild with fury. "You!" he spat, his voice raspy. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything?" "This is my property, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, her voice calm and even. She stood her ground, her posture relaxed but firm. "You're trespassing. Your property." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This land has a soul. It doesn't belong to outsiders with dirty money. It belongs to people who understand it, who've worked for it." The confrontation was a raw battle of wills. Thompson launched into a tirade, a vile stream of racist and sexist insults, each word designed to provoke, to wound, to drag her down into the mud with him. He accused her of every sin he could imagine, his voice getting louder and more desperate with each charge. Marcus took a step forward, his fists clenched, but Sarah put a hand on his arm, holding him back. This was her fight. Her lack of reaction only fueled his rage. He wasn't getting the screaming match he wanted. "You think you're better than me?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "My family were sharecroppers for the Blackwoods on this very land. We had nothing. I clawed my way up, I built a reputation, I earned respect in this town. And you just show up with a fat checkbook and think you can buy my life's work." And there it was. The twist wasn't a hidden fact, it was a pathetic human revelation. His hatred wasn't just about her race or her gender. It was the deep, festering insecurity of a man who spent his life desperate to escape his family's low status, only to see her, a black woman, bypass the entire social ladder he had struggled to climb. He saw his own history of subjugation in her victory. This was the moment of Sarah's ultimate transformation. The old Sarah would have met his anger with her own. But the new Sarah, the leader forged in the crucible of the past month, felt a sudden, profound clarity. She didn't feel rage. She felt pity. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression not of anger, but of finality. "Your life's work, Mr. Thompson. Your work was to get the best price for this farm. You failed. My work was to reclaim my family's legacy. I succeeded." She held his gaze for a long moment. "You are a small man, railing against a world that has already moved on without you." His face fell, the anger momentarily replaced by stunned silence. He had thrown his most powerful weapons at her, and they had all bounced off. He had nothing left. As if on cue, the sound of an approaching siren grew louder. Marcus had made the call the moment Thompson's truck had appeared. A sheriff's car pulled up behind Thompson's pickup. A deputy stepped out, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Freeman?" the deputy asked, his tone respectful. "No problem at all, officer," Sarah said, never breaking eye contact with the defeated man in front of her. "Mr. Thompson was just leaving." The deputy escorted a sputtering, humiliated Bill Thompson to his truck. As he drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust, Sarah stood tall, the undisputed owner of the land and her own destiny. She hadn't needed to shout or to fight. She had won by simply refusing to be dragged down to his level. She had won by becoming untouchable. 6 months later, Blackwood Farm was reborn. The name had been officially and legally changed to Freeman Farms. The remediation work, fully funded by Solara Innovations, was nearly complete, and the creek that ran through the valley was cleaner than it had been in a generation. On a hill overlooking the fields, the first gleaming solar panels were being installed, silent monuments to a new era. The social landscape of Oakhaven had shifted as well. Bill Thompson had left town a week after the confrontation, unable to face the disgrace. The Miller brothers, ever the pragmatists, had approached Sarah with a business proposal to lease some of her pasture land, treating her with the cautious respect reserved for a formidable peer. The power dynamics of the valley had been redrawn, not by force, but by competence and vision. Sarah's victory was not a solitary one. She established the Freeman Family Foundation, using a portion of the initial income from Solara to create scholarships for agricultural and engineering students from the county, ensuring that the next generation would have opportunities her ancestors could only dream of. One crisp autumn evening, Sarah and Marcus sat on the newly renovated porch of the main house. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, casting a warm glow on the land. They weren't just looking at a farm, they were looking at a future. Grandma Elara would have loved this, Marcus said quietly, a sense of awe in his voice. She would have, Sarah agreed, a soft smile on her face. But I think she would have been more proud of the fact that we did it our way. We didn't just take back the land, we made it better. The emotional satisfaction was deep and lasting. It wasn't just about the financial windfall or the victory over prejudice. It was about healing. The land was healing, the community was slowly healing, and the long open wound in her family's history was finally closing. The promise she had made was not just fulfilled, it had been surpassed in ways she could never have imagined. She had reclaimed the past to build a better, more just future, and in doing so had found her true place in the world. 1 year later, the Freeman Farms Fall Festival was in full swing. What started as a small idea had turned into a major community event. Families from all over the county wandered through the grounds, enjoying live music, fresh food from local vendors, and games for the children. The air was filled with laughter and a sense of unity that Oakhaven hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah moved through the crowd, not as a remote landowner, but as a gracious host and a genuine neighbor. She knew people by name, asking about their families and their businesses. She had become a vital part of the community she had once fought so hard just to enter. Old Man Henderson was there, sitting at a picnic table, teaching a group of children how to identify different types of trees, a small, content smile on his face. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed, Sarah stood alone in the quiet living room of the main house. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm light on the room. On the mantelpiece, in a simple, elegant silver frame, was the old weathered photograph of her great-grandfather, Joseph Freeman. He stood tall and proud, his eyes looking out as if surveying the very land she now stood upon. She looked from his image to the window, where the moonlight illuminated the sprawling fields and the faint, distant glow of the solar farm. The past was not an anchor weighing her down, but a foundation upon which she had built. The land was finally at peace, its story one of justice not just claimed but created. Joseph's legacy was not only restored, it was now shining, lighting the way for a brighter future. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that the biggest victories are won not with fists, but with courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. She faced down prejudice and manipulation and turned a trap into her greatest triumph. Her journey shows that sometimes the best way to fight an old broken system is to build a new one in its place. What part of Sarah's strategy impressed you the most? Do you think Henderson's warning was an act of help or a selfish attempt to get the farm for himself? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you watched until this point, show your support by commenting, "I watched until the end," so we know you completed the journey with us. Thank you for being part of our community. If you were inspired by Sarah's story of justice and resilience, you're going to love the story of a chef who took on a corrupt critic. Click the video on your screen right now to see what happens next. Don't forget to like and subscribe.